My name is Patricia and Renner. Most people call me Trish. I am 47 years old. It starts with a phone call about a paternity test nobody asked for, in my kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, on a Tuesday morning at 7:14 a.m., before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. The caller ID said Donna Renner, my stepmother, a woman I had spoken to maybe 4 times in the 11 years since my father remarried, twice at funerals, once at a hospital, and once 3 months ago at my father's own funeral. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "Trish," she said, and I could hear right away that she'd been crying. "I need a favor. I know we're not. I know it's been a long time. But you work in this field, and I don't know who else to call. I want to take you back to the beginning. Because by the time that phone rang, I already knew exactly what case she was talking about. I'd known for 6 days. I just hadn't told anyone yet. Before I take you there, if stories like this one matter to you, please like and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read everyone. Now, back to the beginning. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the only child of Walter Renner and his first wife, Linda. My father ran a small HVAC company, Renner Heating and Cooling, that he'd built from a single van and a pager into a company with 11 trucks by the time I was in high school. My mother died of ovarian cancer when I was 11. I remember the year mostly in fragments. Hospital cafeteria food, a school nurse who let me sit in her office during lunch, and my father, who loved me, but who handled grief the way a lot of men of his generation handled grief, by working 60-hour weeks and not talking about it. The person who got me through that year was my Aunt Carol. She was my father's older sister, never married, no kids of her own, and she lived 40 minutes away in Springfield. Every Friday after my mother died, she drove to our house, picked me up, and took me to her place for the weekend. She had a chemistry set in her spare room, an old one, from a niece who'd outgrown it. And on Saturday afternoons, while my father was at the shop catching up on invoices, Aunt Carol and I would do experiments at her kitchen table, baking soda volcanoes at first. Then, as I got older, real things, she'd ordered a microscope kit from a catalog, and we'd look at onion cells, pond water, our own cheek cells under the lens. Aunt Carol was a retired school librarian. She didn't know much about science herself, but she knew I loved it, and she never once told me it was a strange thing for a girl to love. She used to say, "Trish, the truth doesn't care if you like it. It just sits there, being true, until somebody bothers to look." I didn't know yet how much that sentence would matter. When I was 12, my father remarried. Donna had 2 kids from a previous marriage, a daughter, Brittany, who was 16 and mostly stayed away from us, and a son, Cody, who was 4. Cody was a baby, really, when Donna and my father got married. And my father, I want to be fair here, my father loved that little boy like his own from the very start. He coached Cody's t-ball team. He taught him to fish. By the time Cody was old enough to understand what a last name was, he was a Renner in every way that mattered to my father, and eventually, legally too. My father formally adopted him when Cody was 7. I was 12 and quiet and grieving, and I was not the child in that house anymore who got coached and fished with and fussed over. I don't say that with bitterness, or I try not to. Donna wasn't cruel to me. She just had a son who needed a father, and my father had a hole in his life shaped exactly like a little boy who adored him. And I was a 12-year-old girl who mostly just wanted to be left alone with her books and her microscope. What I remember most from those years is a specific kind of phrase, repeated in different forms, usually not even unkindly. Cody's going to take over the business someday. Cody's just like his dad. It just makes sense. Cody's the one who's here. I was sent to Sinclair Community College after high school, on my own dime mostly, because, and I heard this said directly at the kitchen table when I was 17, there's only so much we can do for everybody, and Cody's still got years of school ahead of him. I want to be precise about something. My father was not a villain. He paid for half my community college eventually. He came to my associate's degree ceremony. He was, in his own limited way, proud of me. But there was always a current underneath everything, a sense that Cody was the future of the family, and I was someone who'd turned out fine on her own, so she didn't need much. I transferred to Wright State, then to Ohio State for my master's. I got a degree in molecular genetics, and I went to work for a company that does, among other things, accredited paternity and relationship DNA testing. The kind of testing used for legal cases, immigration cases, and court-ordered custody and inheritance disputes. I worked my way up over 15 years. Today, I'm the laboratory director of Heartland Genetic Diagnostics, an AABB-accredited lab in Columbus. I oversee, among other things, the chain of custody process and the final review of every legal-grade paternity and kinship report that leaves our building. When people at family gatherings asked what I did, my father would say, "Trish does something with computers and blood tests, real complicated stuff." And Donna would nod politely. And Cody, who by then had taken over day-to-day operations at Renner Heating and Cooling, would usually be telling a story about a commercial job his crew had landed. Nobody in that family, as far as I could tell, had any real idea what my job actually was. I'd stopped trying to explain it. My father died 3 months ago. A heart attack, sudden in the office at the shop, on a Wednesday afternoon. He was 74. If you've ever had a parent who loved you in a complicated way present, but never quite seeing all of you, and then they're gone before you can sort out how you feel about that, drop a comment below and tell me how you're doing with it. I read everyone. Now, back to what happened after. The funeral was at a church in Dayton. I drove up from Columbus. Donna and Cody and Brittany were there, along with most of Renner Heating and Cooling's 11 employees, several of whom had worked for my father for over 20 years. I gave a short reading. Cody gave the eulogy, a good one, actually, warm and funny. The kind of eulogy that makes you remember someone was a whole person and not just somebody's dad. Afterward, at the reception, Donna pulled me aside and told me there to be some paperwork stuff in the coming weeks, and that the family attorney, a man named Greg Ashworth, who'd handled my father's business and personal affairs for over 20 years, would be in touch. I said that was fine. I genuinely wasn't thinking about the will. I was thinking about the fact that I'd just buried the only parent I had left, and that Aunt Carol, who died 4 years earlier of a stroke at 81, wasn't there either, and that the two people who'd raised me in their different ways were both just gone now. 6 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from Greg Ashworth's office. Not about the will directly, about something else. My father's will, it turned out, was old, drafted 22 years earlier, shortly after he and Donna got married, and never updated. It left the business and the house in roughly equal shares to my children. At the time it was written, that meant me and Cody had already been adopted by then. So legally, he was unambiguously my father's son. Full stop, no question. The will didn't even need to specify biological or adopted, because under Ohio law, an adopted child is treated identically to a biological child for inheritance purposes. That part was never in dispute. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters for what comes next. The issue was Brittany. Brittany, Donna's daughter from her first marriage, 16, when Donna and my father got married, had never been formally adopted by my father. She'd kept her biological father's last name. She'd never lived with us full time. She'd mostly stayed with her own father in Cincinnati and visited on weekends. As far as the will was concerned, Brittany wasn't my children. She wasn't my father's child legally, by any definition. But Brittany, it turned out, had spent the last several years believing, and had told her own attorney, when she retained one shortly after the funeral, that my father was, in fact, her biological father. That her mother and my father had been involved years before Donna and my father officially got together. That Brittany had been born during that earlier relationship, and that the man Brittany had grown up calling Dad, Donna's first husband, was not her biological father at all. Brittany was contesting the will. Her claim was that she was entitled to a share of the estate as Walter Renner's biological daughter, will or no will, under Ohio's pretermitted heir statutes, laws that exist to protect children a parent didn't know about or didn't account for at the time a will was written. Greg Ashworth's office needed a paternity test, a legal, court-admissible one with full chain of custody to determine whether Brittany was, biologically, my father's daughter. They sent the case to Heartland Genetic Diagnostics, my lab. I want to tell you what that moment was like, because it's the moment everything in this story turns on. I wasn't the one who opened the case file. Our intake coordinator, a woman named Priya, who's worked for me for 6 years, opens every legal case and assigns it a case number. We don't use names in the lab during processing, only case numbers, specifically to prevent exactly the kind of conflict I'm about to describe. The samples come in as buccal swabs in sealed kits, labeled only with case numbers, and a chain of custody form that lists names. But that form goes into a locked file separate from the lab floor. 6 days before Donna's phone call, Priya came into my office holding a chain of custody form, looking uncomfortable. "Trish," she said, "I think you need to see this before I file it." The form listed 3 names. The alleged father deceased, sample obtained via a previously banked specimen from a hospital biopsy, with a court order authorizing its release. The child requesting testing, Brittany Marie Coyle, and the attorney of record, Greg Ashworth. My father's name was on a chain of custody form in my lab 6 weeks after I buried him. I told Priya I needed to recuse myself from the case immediately in writing, and I asked her to reassign the final review to Dr. Marcus Webb, our associate director, and to make sure the conflict of interest documentation was airtight, date-stamped, filed. A clear paper trail showing I had 0 involvement in the testing, the analysis, or the report itself. This is standard. This is what you do. The integrity of a result like this depends on nobody, with a personal stake having their hands anywhere near it. What I did not do, what I want to be honest about, is tell anyone in my family that the case existed, or that it had landed at my lab, or that I knew about it at all. Partly because of confidentiality, I legally couldn't discuss an active case, even with Priya, beyond what was needed for the recusal. But partly, too, because I didn't know yet what the answer would be, and I didn't know what I'd do with knowing it before anyone else did. Dr. Webb completed the analysis 4 days later. I didn't see the report. I made sure of that. But I did see, on the morning Donna called me, because Priya, following our protocol to the letter, had sent a notification to my office, email simply confirming that case 2411-87 has been finalized and released to the requesting attorney, that the case was done, released, out of our hands. Whatever it said, Greg Ashworth had it now. And 2 hours later, my phone rang, and it was Donna. "I need a favor," she said again. "Greg got some kind of report back today about Brittany's case, the paternity thing with your dad's estate, and he says it's not what we expected, and Trish, you understand this stuff. Could you maybe call him? Look at it. He said something about wanting a second opinion, and I thought, well, you'd know people. You'd know if it's even possible there's some kind of mistake." I asked her carefully what the report said. There was a long pause. Then Donna said, very quietly, "It says Brittany isn't his, that your dad isn't her father. But Trish, that doesn't make sense. Brittany's been telling everyone for months that she found letters, that there were photos, that her mom and your dad, that there was something between them before. She seemed so sure. I sat down at my kitchen table. The same kitchen where, 20 minutes earlier, I'd been reading the email confirming the case had closed. "And here's the thing," Donna said, and her voice cracked. "If Brittany's claim falls apart, if she's not his biological daughter, then her lawyers already said they're going to ask for the whole case to get re-examined, including Cody's part of it. Because if we're opening up paternity as an issue at all, for the estate, Cody's lawyer is worried it could open the door to questions about Cody too. Even though Cody was adopted, even though that's never been in question, Greg says once a court starts looking at biological paternity for one child in a family, in a contested estate, sometimes everything gets re-examined. And I need to know what this means. For Cody, for the business. I don't know who else has the kind of expertise to just tell me honestly what's going on. Only 3% of people who watch a video like this actually subscribe. If a story about quiet, careful people, the ones who do the unglamorous work nobody notices, until suddenly everyone needs them, means something to you, that's the only reason to tap that button. Okay, let's keep going. I want to tell you what I was thinking, sitting at that table, because it wasn't anger. I'd expected, if this moment ever came, that I'd feel something sharp, vindication, maybe, or bitterness. 20 years of Trish does something with computers and blood tests. 20 years of being the one who turned out fine on her own. And here was Donna, calling me at 7 a.m., needing exactly, precisely, the thing I'd spent 15 years becoming. But mostly what I felt was tired, and a little sad, because I already knew something Donna didn't yet, not from the report, which I hadn't seen and never would, but from something else. Something Aunt Carol left me. After Aunt Carol died, I inherited her house in Springfield, which I sold, and a few boxes of her belongings, which I kept and never fully went through. Partly because going through them meant accepting she was really gone, and partly because, honestly, I assumed they were mostly old library books and church bulletins. About a year ago, going through one of those boxes looking for a recipe card, I found a small bundle of letters, tied with string, tucked inside a hat box. They were from my father to Aunt Carol, written in the early 1980s, before I was born, when my father was in his mid-20s, several years before he met my mother. In one of those letters, dated 1981, my father wrote to his sister about a relationship he'd had briefly the year before with a woman named Sandra. He wrote that Sandra had gotten married to someone else shortly after they broke up, moved on fast, faster than I figured she would, and that he'd heard, secondhand, that Sandra had a baby not too long after. He wrote, almost as an aside, "Sometimes I wonder about the timing on that, Carol, but it's none of my business now, and I'm not going to go stirring anything up. She's married. Let it be. I'd read that letter a year ago and felt a strange chill, but I'd told myself it was nothing. A vague, decades old, I wonder, the kind of thing people write and never think about again. I didn't know Sandra's last name. I didn't connect it to anyone. But when Brittany filed her claim 6 weeks ago, and her attorney's paperwork crossed Greg Ashworth's desk, paperwork that, per the court order, included Brittany's mother's name for the chain of custody documentation, Priya had to log it. And because I'd recused myself in writing, I never saw that paperwork. Except I had already seen the name. Sandra. Brittany's mother, Donna's first husband's first wife, the woman Donna always referred to as Brittany's mom, before me, was the same Sandra from the 1981 letter. I'd recognized it the moment Donna mentioned, months ago, in some unrelated conversation, that Brittany's mother's name was Sandra, and that she and my father had actually known each other a little, way back, small world. Donna had said it lightly, as a funny little coincidence. I'd filed it away and forgotten about it, until Brittany's claim landed, and I remembered and went back and found that letter again in Aunt Carol's hatbox and sat with it for a long, quiet evening. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. It wasn't evidence. It was a 30-year-old private letter between two people who were both gone now, and it didn't prove anything the DNA test couldn't prove on its own, one way or the other. But it told me something the test results, by themselves, couldn't, that my father had wondered. That somewhere, 40-some years ago, a much younger Walter Renner had a flicker of a thought. I wonder about the timing on that, and had decided, deliberately, not to go stirring anything up. He never knew. I'm almost sure of that. If he'd known, really known, I think my father, whatever his blind spots, would have done something about it. He adopted Cody without a second thought. He would not have let Brittany grow up just down the road, in the same small orbit of family gatherings, without ever, he didn't know. He just wondered once, and let it be. And now, 40-some years later, the question he chose not to ask had landed on a chain of custody form in my lab. So when Donna asked me, that Tuesday morning, to call Greg Ashworth and look into the report, to use my expertise to find some kind of mistake, some reason the result could be wrong, I had to tell her something true, carefully, in a way that didn't violate anything I was bound by, professionally or ethically. I said, Donna, I can't look at that report. I want to be honest with you about why. That case came through my lab. I recused myself the moment I found out, 6 days ago, because of who was involved. I haven't seen the results, and I'm not going to, not because I don't want to help you, but because if I did, and anyone ever found out, it would call the entire result into question, for everyone, including Cody. The most helpful thing I can tell you is this. My lab's accreditation depends on results that nobody, including me, can second guess after the fact. If Dr. Webb's report says what you think it says, it's not a mistake. It's not something a second opinion is going to undo. There was a long silence. So it's true, Donna said, not really a question. I don't know what the report says, I said. I genuinely don't. But I know how the process works, and I know it's accurate. If it says what you think, then it's true. I'm sorry. What about Cody? She asked, and her voice had changed quieter, scared in a different way now. If they reopen everything because of Brittany, if they start asking about Cody too. Donna, I said, Cody was adopted. Legally adopted 20 years ago by my father in a court of law. Biology has nothing to do with Cody's status as Dad's son, not legally, not in any way that matters for the will. Nobody can reopen that. An adoption isn't a guess that DNA can correct. It's a decision my father made, on purpose, in front of a judge, and signed his name to. That's not in question. That's never been in question. Whatever Brittany's situation turns out to be, it has nothing to do with Cody's place in this family. Tell Cody that. Tell him I said so, if it helps. But it's true regardless of who says it. Donna started crying again, different crying this time. I could hear it. I should have called you years ago, she said. Not for this, just in general. I should have called you. I want to tell you what happened over the next few weeks, because it's not dramatic, and I think that's the point. Brittany's claim, once the test results were entered into the record, was withdrawn within days. There was nothing left to contest. Under Ohio law, a pretermitted heir claim requires that you actually be the testator's child, and the science had answered that question. I never spoke to Brittany directly about any of it, and I don't know, to this day, whether she genuinely believed her claim, or whether someone had told her something that turned out not to hold up. I try not to guess at that. It's not really my story to tell. What I can tell you is what happened with Cody. About 3 weeks after that phone call, Cody drove down to Columbus, alone, on a Saturday, and asked if he could take me to lunch. We went to a diner near my house. I'd maybe had 10 one-on-one conversations with Cody in my entire life, total, across 43 years. He told me he'd talked to Donna and to Greg, and that he understood now, really understood, for the first time, what my job actually was. Not something with computers and blood tests. He said, Trish, do you realize that if you'd done what Mom asked, even just looked at it, even just made one phone call to try to help, you could have blown up your entire career for us. And you didn't even hesitate. I told him it wasn't really a hard decision. The hard part wasn't deciding what to do. The hard part was that nobody in my family had ever known enough about what I do to understand why it mattered. Cody was quiet for a minute. Then he said, Dad used to say you were the smart one. Did you know that? He said it to me once, when I was maybe 16, complaining about a chemistry test. He said, your sister could have explained this to you in 5 minutes, but she's 3 hours away building a whole career, so you're stuck with me. I never told you that. I don't know why. I guess I figured you knew. I didn't know. 20 years of Trish does something with computers and blood tests. And somewhere in there, my father had said that once to a 16-year-old about a chemistry test, and it had just never made its way to me. I still have Aunt Carol's letters. I gave the rest of her boxes to a local historical society that does oral history collection. She'd have liked that, I think, her recipe cards and church bulletins becoming somebody's research someday. But I kept the letters. I keep them in the same drawer where I keep my own lab credentials, my board certification, my AABB inspector training certificate, the original offer letter from 15 years ago that says, at the bottom, in someone's handwriting, strong candidate, quiet but thorough. Quiet but thorough. Aunt Carol used to say something close to that too, about the truth sitting there being true until somebody bothers to look. I think about that a lot now. How long the truth can sit in a drawer, in a hat box, in a sealed lab kit with a case number instead of a name. Just being true, waiting for someone who knows how to look. Even at 47, with 15 years in a field most of my own family never understood, I'm still learning things about what it means to actually be seen. So here's where I've landed, looking back on all of it. 1. Being underestimated for 20 years doesn't make you bitter by default. But it does mean that when the moment finally comes, you've had a lot of practice staying calm. 2. Expertise that nobody in your family understands is still expertise. It doesn't need their understanding to be real. 3. The hardest ethical decisions aren't the ones where you're tempted to do wrong. They're the ones where doing right means the people who need your help the most won't get the shortcut they were hoping for. 4. An old letter, a half-remembered comment, a "she's the smart one" said to the wrong person 20 years too early. These things don't disappear. They just wait. 5. Sometimes the people who never understood you aren't being dismissive on purpose. They just never had a reason to ask. And sometimes all it takes is one phone call on one Tuesday morning for that to finally change. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me about a skill or a part of your life that the people closest to you have never really understood. I read everyone.